$180,000. That's how much money disappeared in a single morning. Not stolen by a foreign government, not lost in a market crash, destroyed by one man, one spreadsheet, and the most brazen accounting lie in American history. His name was Bernie Ebbers. And 6 months ago, every major bank on Wall Street called him a genius. He built a company worth $180 billion from nothing. A company that carried nearly half of all internet traffic in America. A company 80,000 people worked for. They arrested him in his own front yard, in his bathrobe. But here's what the news cameras missed that morning. The fraud had been hiding in plain sight for years. Auditors had signed off on it. Regulators had missed it. Wall Street had celebrated it. And by the time anyone looked closely enough to see the truth, $11 billion had already vanished. Bernie Ebbers wasn't supposed to end up on Wall Street. He grew up poor in Edmonton, Canada. He paid his way through college delivering milk. His first real job was coaching high school basketball in Mississippi. He was loud, charismatic, the kind of guy who could sell anything to anyone. And in 1983, he tried to sell something unusual: long-distance phone calls. AT&T had just been broken up by the government. Suddenly, anyone could resell long-distance service. Ebbers saw the gap before almost anyone else did. He and 3 partners sketched a business plan on a napkin, literally on a napkin. That napkin became LDDS Communications. By 1985, Ebbers was CEO. By 1993, LDDS had swallowed 9 other companies. His strategy was simple: buy a telecom company, cut every cost you can find, use the stock price to buy another one. Repeat. It worked spectacularly. Wall Street loved him. NBC had him on constantly. He wore cowboy boots to analyst meetings and didn't apologize for it. In 1998, he pulled off the impossible. WorldCom acquired MCI, a company 3 times its size, $37 billion. The largest merger in American history at that point. Overnight, WorldCom carried 50% of all U.S. internet traffic. Half the emails sent in America passed through Bernie Ebbers' cables. Investors poured in, pension funds, teachers' retirement accounts, ordinary people who just wanted a piece of the future. And Bernie Ebbers delivered, quarter after quarter, growth that never seemed to slow down. Analysts who questioned the numbers were dismissed as people who didn't get it. But there was something nobody in that boardroom wanted to discuss. The telecom bubble was quietly running out of air. Internet traffic was growing, but prices were crashing. WorldCom's actual business was making less money every single quarter. So how's Bernie Ebbers still posting record profits? That question had an answer, but only 4 people in the entire company knew it. And there was one other thing, something small, easy to miss in a company with $40 billion in assets. Bernie Ebbers had started borrowing money from WorldCom itself, hundreds of millions of dollars. We'll come back to that. To understand what WorldCom did, you need to understand one accounting rule. It's boring, but it's the key to everything. When a company spends money on day-to-day operations, that's an operating cost. Salaries, electricity, rent. Those costs hit your profit and loss statement immediately. They make your profits look smaller right now. But when a company buys a long-term asset, a building, a machine, a cable network, that's a capital expenditure. You spread that cost over many years. It barely touches your profits today. Scott Sullivan found the gap between those 2 columns, and he drove $11 billion through it. Here's what he actually did. WorldCom was paying other telecom companies to use their networks. These were called line costs. Billions of dollars a year. Unavoidable. Immediate. Ugly on a balance sheet. Sullivan simply reclassified them. He took operating costs that should have destroyed WorldCom's profits and relabeled them as capital expenditures. Costs that were supposed to hit right now got pushed years into the future. Fake profits appeared on the books. Wall Street celebrated. The stock climbed, and nobody asked questions. It sounds complicated. It wasn't. It was essentially moving numbers from one column to another. A first-year accounting student could have spotted it. In fact, one did, but we'll get to her. Between 1999 and 2002, Sullivan moved $11 billion in fake expenses. $11,000. To put that number in context, that's more than the GDP of some countries. And while the fraud was running, the victims were piling up. Meet Gene Morse, a WorldCom internal auditor who kept finding numbers that didn't add up. He brought his concerns to his supervisor. His supervisor told him to drop it. Meet the employees of WorldCom's Jackson, Mississippi office. They had put their entire retirement savings into company stock because Bernie Evers told them it was safe. Because he told them WorldCom was built to last. While they were doing that, Bernie Evers was doing something else entirely. Evers owned a 164,000-acre ranch in British Columbia, one of the largest ranches in Canada. He owned a luxury yacht called the Acquisition. He owned a chain of motels, a lumber company, a minor league hockey team, a private jet that cost more per hour than most Americans made in a week. None of this came from his salary. All of it was funded by loans from WorldCom itself. By 2002, Evers had borrowed $408 million from his own company. The board signed off on every single loan because Evers had personally selected most of the board members. When his WorldCom stock was used as collateral for outside loans and the stock price started falling, his brokers issued margin calls. He needed cash immediately, so he went back to WorldCom for more. The company was being looted from the top and the bottom simultaneously. Sullivan was cooking the books to hide the losses. Evers was draining the cash to cover his personal debts, and 80,000 employees had no idea. Now, everything I've told you so far is bad. A CFO secretly moving billions between accounting columns. A CEO borrowing $408 million to fund a private empire. Regulators asleep at the wheel. But what I'm about to tell you next, this is the part that still makes my jaw drop. While Sullivan was running this fraud at the executive level, WorldCom's own internal audit team was starting to notice. Not the outside auditors, not the SEC, not the FBI, the people inside the building. And when they brought it up, their bosses told them to stop looking. But one auditor didn't stop. She kept going, at night, in secret, on her own time. Her name was Cynthia Cooper, and she was about to bring down the second largest telecom company in American history, all by herself. Cynthia Cooper was 38 years old. She had worked at WorldCom for years. She was not a whistleblower by nature. She was not trying to be a hero. She was just an accountant who couldn't make the numbers work. In March 2002, a tip came in through WorldCom's internal audit hotline. Someone had noticed unusual entries in a small subsidiary's books. Cooper assigned it to her team as a routine check, but the numbers didn't match. She dug one level deeper. They still didn't match. She asked her direct supervisor, WorldCom's CFO Scott Sullivan, for an explanation. Sullivan told her to back off. He said the audit was premature. He told her to delay her review until the third quarter. Most people would have stopped there. Cooper didn't stop. She and her small team started working after hours, deliberately. So Sullivan's allies in the building wouldn't see what they were doing. They pulled transaction records manually. They cross-referenced capital expenditure accounts. They ran queries on systems they weren't supposed to need access to. And then on a Tuesday night in May 2002, Gene Morse found it. $500 million in capital expenditures. No invoices. No contracts. No assets purchased. Just $500 million moved from one column to another. He called Cooper immediately. She drove back to the office. They kept pulling the thread. $500 million became $2 billion. $2 billion became $3.8 billion. By the time they finished, the number was $3.8 billion just for that fiscal year. Across all years examined, $11 billion. Cooper went directly to WorldCom's audit committee, bypassing Sullivan entirely, bypassing her entire chain of command. On June 20th, 2002, she presented the findings to the board's audit committee. The room went silent. 3 days later, WorldCom fired Scott Sullivan. They also forced Bernie Ebbers to resign, which he had already done in April under pressure. But the cover-up attempt was already in motion. Sullivan had been quietly shredding documents. For weeks, he had also pressured subordinates to approve fraudulent entries. Some complied. Some didn't sleep for months afterward. On June 25, 2002, WorldCom announced the fraud publicly. $3.8 billion in fake profits. The largest accounting fraud ever discovered in American history at that point. The stock, which had once traded at $64 a share, closed that day at 9 cents. 9 cents. Retirement accounts that had been worth $300,000 were worth $4,200. On July 21, 2002, WorldCom filed for bankruptcy. $41 billion in assets. The largest bankruptcy in American history, surpassing Enron, which had collapsed just 8 months earlier. The FBI moved fast. They had actually been watching WorldCom since the Enron collapse. They already had subpoenas prepared. On August 1, 2002, agents arrested Scott Sullivan at his home in Boca Raton. He was in shorts and a t-shirt when they put the handcuffs on. Sullivan made a calculation immediately. He decided to cooperate. He would testify against Ebbers in exchange for a reduced sentence. Bernie Ebbers' legal team tried everything. They argued he didn't understand the accounting. They called him a simple businessman, not a financial mastermind. They said Sullivan had acted alone. But Sullivan sat in that witness box and told a different story. He testified that Ebbers knew, that Ebbers had demanded the numbers be fixed. That Ebbers' exact words, repeated in that courtroom, were, "We have to hit our numbers." The jury heard 25 days of testimony. They deliberated for 8 days. Then they came back, guilty, on all 9 counts of securities fraud and conspiracy. But here's the detail that sealed it beyond any doubt. Remember that email Sullivan should have deleted? In it, Sullivan explicitly asked a subordinate to move line costs into capital accounts. The subordinate wrote back confused, asking if that was correct. Sullivan confirmed it, in writing, with a timestamp. The FBI had found it in a backup server Sullivan didn't know existed. You can't delete what you don't know is there. On July 13, 2005, Bernie Ebbers stood before a federal judge. He was 63 years old. His lawyers had argued for leniency. They brought character witnesses. They talked about his church, his philanthropy, his age. The judge listened to all of it, then sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison. The judge said it plainly. The sentence needed to send a message that CEOs who loot companies don't get to retire quietly. Scott Sullivan cooperated fully with prosecutors. He received 5 years. He served less than 2. Bernie Ebbers reported to Oakdale Federal Correctional Institution in Louisiana. He was prisoner number 5622254. He served 13 years before being released in December 2019 on compassionate grounds. He was dying of kidney disease. He died 2 months later, in February 2020, at home in Mississippi. He never admitted guilt publicly. Not once. Now let's talk about what his fraud actually cost. Not in abstract dollar figures. In people. WorldCom had 80,000 employees. Tens of thousands lost their jobs within months of the bankruptcy. Many had their entire retirement savings in WorldCom stock, because the company had actively encouraged employees to load their 401k accounts with WorldCom shares, right up until the end, while executives knew the stock was worthless. Barbara Markham had worked at WorldCom for 17 years. She had $350,000 in her retirement account. She lost $340,000 of it. She was 58 years old when the fraud was revealed. Too old to start over easily. Too young to stop working. She is not unique. Thousands of WorldCom employees share versions of her story. But here's where the story changes direction. because WorldCom's collapse, coming just 8 months after Enron, finally broke through Washington's resistance to reform. Congress had been dragging its feet on corporate accountability for years. After WorldCom, they had no more excuses. On July 30, 2002, just 9 days after WorldCom's bankruptcy filing, President Bush signed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act into law. It was the most significant financial regulation passed since the Great Depression. Here's what it actually changed. CEOs and CFOs now had to personally certify that their financial statements were accurate, in writing, under penalty of criminal prosecution. No more "I didn't know what my CFO was doing." No more "I'm just a simple businessman." You sign it, you own it. External auditors were now banned from also doing consulting work for the same company, because a conflict of interest had let Arthur Andersen sign off on both Enron and WorldCom. Audit committees became mandatory for every public company. Whistleblower protections were dramatically strengthened. Cynthia Cooper, the woman who worked late nights in a dark office, who ignored her boss's instructions to stop looking, who walked into that boardroom with $3.8 billion worth of evidence. Time magazine named her one of 3 persons of the year in 2002. She went on to write a book about what she saw inside WorldCom. She still speaks about corporate ethics to this day. Now here's why this still matters in 2024. Sarbanes-Oxley changed the rules, but it didn't change human nature. Since WorldCom, we've had the 2008 mortgage fraud, Theranos, FTX. Each time, the same pattern. A charismatic founder, numbers too good to question, investors who didn't want the music to stop, and ordinary people left holding the bill. Bernie Ebbers didn't invent that pattern, but he perfected it at a scale nobody had seen before. And the uncomfortable truth is this: every fraud of this size requires more than one criminal. It requires auditors who don't look too hard, analysts who don't ask uncomfortable questions, boards who keep cashing their retainer checks, and investors who are more afraid of missing out than of being lied to. WorldCom existed because an entire system decided that the music was too good to stop. Cynthia Cooper was the one person who turned it off. And that's how one woman with a spreadsheet changed American financial law forever. If you thought WorldCom was brazen, the next case I'm covering involves a woman who convinced some of the smartest investors in Silicon Valley that a tiny blood drop could run 200 medical tests. It couldn't run any. That one's coming next week.